Right, so get this. We're diving into some pretty intense economic stuff today.
Yeah.
You guys want to know what's up with these tariff threats from, former President Trump?
Yeah.
Especially aimed at the BRICS nations.
Right.
It's not just like trade wars or whatever. It's about, the future of the U.S. dollar on like the global stage, the whole thing.
Okay, so what's interesting here, right? For like decades, the world's depended on the U.S. dollar, but things are changing. BRICS nations are, gaining power, economic muscle, and they want to change that whole situation. They want control,
right?
And they want to be less dependent on the U.S. and they're like actually looking into ways to make that happen.
So we've got this global news article. It's like hot off the press. About Trump's latest tariff threats.
Right.
Plus, we've got this in-depth report from the Atlantic Council about like the U.S. dollar's global role. So today we're going to unpack all that and try to like figure out what it all means for like, you and me and the global economy.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. Trump's threatening a 100% tariff on any BRICS nation that, tries to mess with the U.S. dollar.
Wow, 100%. That's a lot.
It is. It's a direct hit at those big economies, China, India, and Russia.
Yeah. But didn't he kind of pull this before?
He did.
With Mexico and Canada? Like the tariff thing.
Yeah.
Didn't he try that?
Exactly. So remember back then, he was threatening a 25% tariff. And that's what, eventually led to renegotiations.
Right.
Not an all-out trade war.
Right.
So the question is, will this time be the same?
Okay, so the reactions have been kind of mixed. Like Trudeau went to meet with Trump and came back empty-handed on the whole tariff issue.
Yeah.
But then the president of Mexico, she seemed a lot more optimistic after like her phone call with Trump. So I don't know. Why the difference? It's weird.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's super interesting. And while, Trump's talking tough, the Atlantic Council report suggests that the U.S. dollar isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay.
Like their model, what they concluded is that the dollar is likely to be, quote, secure in the near and medium term.
Okay, so maybe not an immediate collapse, but something's definitely brewing.
Right.
So before we go any further, let's just make sure we're all on the same page here.
Okay.
What exactly is BRICS?
Okay.
And why are they so focused on this whole ditching the dollar thing, which is, I guess, also known as de-dollarization?
Right. So BRICS, it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Got it.
So they're kind of like the rising stars, the up-and-comers of the global economy. They're powerful.
Right.
And they all want to move away from this U.S.-centric financial system.
One thing that really stuck with me was Putin saying that the U.S. is, quote, weaponizing the dollar and that they're, like, forced to find alternatives. It's not every day you hear a world leader use language like that.
You're right. It is pretty strong language.
Yeah.
It shows that there's a lot of frustration among these BRICS nations. So what Putin's talking about is, the fact that the U.S. can use, its control over global finance as leverage. To get what they want. And it's more than just sanctions.
Right.
The U.S. can influence global markets and make things really difficult for countries that don't, play by their rules.
So it's like a financial pressure point.
Exactly.
And if they're feeling the squeeze, it makes sense they'd want out. Putin said they're being, quote, forced to search for alternatives. So what are we talking about here? Like, what kind of alternatives?
Well, a key example is Russia's push for this new payment system.
Okay.
It's going to rival SWIFT, which is, the current global standard. The problem is SWIFT is heavily influenced by the U.S. and its allies, which makes Russia vulnerable to sanctions and pressure. So their goal is to create a system, where they can bypass all those restrictions and just trade freely.
So it's like building a separate financial universe. They don't have to worry about U.S. influence.
Right.
But if Russia's doing its own thing, what are the other BRICS nations up to?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting. So Russia's doing their own thing with SWIFT.
Right.
But the other BRICS nations are taking a different approach.
Okay.
More of a team effort, They want to increase trade using their own currencies, set up joint financial institutions like the New Development Bank, and they're even thinking about a shared BRICS currency.
Whoa, hold on. A shared currency?
Yeah.
That's a big deal. What would that even look like?
It is. It's definitely a long-term goal. They're still figuring out the details.
But think about it.
Okay.
BRICS nations, trading with a currency that's like totally separate from the U.S. dollar.
Right.
That would give them way more control over their economies.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a second.
Right.
Think about what could actually happen if BRICS actually pulls this off and the dollar's not on top anymore.
Right.
What happens to the average person?
Well, one thing you might see is a lot more volatility in the currency markets. When countries move away from the dollar, you could see crazy fluctuations in exchange rates, which would make international trade a lot more complex and probably mean higher prices for anything imported.
So that trip to Europe's going to get a lot more expensive.
Maybe, yeah.
What else should we be thinking about?
Well, what if you can't just use your credit card wherever you go?
Oh, right.
If the dollar isn't the main currency for international stuff, you might have to exchange currencies all the time, which means more fees and more hassle, and it might even be harder to invest in foreign markets.
So it's not just vacation costs.
Nope.
It could mess with the whole global economy.
It could.
But what about the really big picture? Yeah. Could this shift in power change global politics?
Oh, for sure. The dollar being on top has given the U.S. a lot of power, on the world stage.
Yeah.
If that changes, we could see global power dynamics shift completely.
Okay.
Some people think a world with less U.S. influence could mean more cooperation and stability.
Right. But others might say it could lead to more conflict.
Yeah, there are definitely two sides to that.
So on one hand, we have this Atlantic Council report saying the dollar is safe for now.
Right.
But on the other hand, Trump's out there with these aggressive tariff threats. Are those threats just talk?
Right.
Or could they actually make things worse and push countries away from the dollar? That's the big question, isn't it? Trump's not afraid to use tariffs to get what he wants. But 100% tariff on BRICS nations?
Right.
That would be extreme. And it could be a disaster. Yeah. Not just for them, but for the U.S. economy, too.
It's a really risky game. What do you think Trump's trying to do?
Well, it's probably a few things.
Okay.
Trump's always been about America first.
Right.
And going after BRICS fits with that whole, protectionist idea.
But wouldn't, shutting out these big economies actually hurt the U.S. eventually?
It could.
Globalization isn't going away, is it?
You've got a point. The global economy is all connected.
Right.
And cutting ties with China and India could be bad for American businesses and consumers. It's this tug of war, Trump wants to keep the U.S. on top. Yeah. But the world isn't moving towards a more decentralized financial system. Right. And it's not clear who's going to win.
This is a lot. It's the whole global economy is hanging in the balance.
It is a lot to think about. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
Even as we speak, things are happening.
Right.
New alliances are forming. The whole landscape is shifting. What we're seeing is this clash.
Yeah.
Between the old way of doing things and a new one that's still taking shape.
It's like watching the world of finance change right in front of us.
It is.
But with all this uncertainty, one thing keeps coming back to me.
Yeah.
That Atlantic Council model that says the dollar will stay strong. It's just one model, right? Are there things they might be missing that could change everything?
Absolutely. No model is perfect.
Right.
Especially with something as complicated as the global economy.
So what could, throw things off?
Well, one thing we haven't talked much about is technology.
Oh, yeah, true.
Digital currencies, blockchain.
Yeah.
That could completely change how we think about money.
It could, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just reading about how some countries are trying out those central bank digital currencies.
Yeah, CBDCs?
CBDCs, yeah.
Yeah.
Could that make the move away from the dollar even faster?
It might. And then there's the question of how people will react. If people lose faith in the dollar, they might start putting their money into other things, which would make the dollar even weaker.
So it's not just about governments and central banks.
Nope.
It's about regular people making choices.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to understand what's going on and to be aware of the risks and the opportunities.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot.
We have.
Trump's tariff threats, BRICS, a multipolar world, and how technology could change everything. I feel like I get it now.
Me too. And hopefully our listener does too.
But with all this uncertainty, our listener's probably feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So let's break it down. What are the most important things for our listener to understand about the future of the U.S. dollar and the whole global financial system?
I think the main thing to remember is that we're in a time of change.
Okay.
Like a historical turning point.
Right.
The old way of doing things is being challenged.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what's going to happen.
So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
It is, but even with all the uncertainty, it's kind of exciting.
It is.
You know, we're watching a new era in global finance being born,
Yeah.
and it's amazing to be a part of it.
I like that. It's not just doom and gloom.
Right.
It's about something new and maybe better coming out of all this.
Exactly. And that's where our listener comes in. So with this new era, right, what does it mean for, like, the average person listening?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Like, how do they make sense of all this?
Well, I think the first thing is, you know, stay informed.
Okay.
Keep up with what BRICS is doing, especially with those alternative systems they're building.
Right.
Like the financial institutions and payment systems.
Yeah.
And watch how the U.S. reacts to that and which countries side with who.
It really is like a big chess game, isn't it?
It is.
All these players making their moves.
And knowing what those moves are,
Yeah.
that's super important for anyone who wants to, you know, do well in this new global setup.
But you're saying it's not just about watching.
No.
Like, people can actually be a part of this.
They can. Think about it. Decentralized finance, digital currencies, all that, anyone can be a part of that.
Yeah.
It's a chance to learn,
Right.
explore, maybe even benefit from these changes.
So it's not just about, like, battening down the hatches.
Right.
It's about seeing the opportunities that come with all this.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the big question.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to the U.S. dollar?
Right.
Will it stay on top, or will we see this multipolar world with, like, a bunch of different currencies competing?
Honestly, after all this, I don't know.
Yeah.
It feels like we're at this, like, turning point.
Yeah.
And whatever happens next is going to decide what the global economy looks like.
You got it. And the cool thing is,
Yeah.
we all have a role to play in making that happen.
Right.
It's the choices we make as consumers, the investments we make, or even just staying informed and involved. We're all part of this.
This deep dive has been, like, eye-opening.
Glad to hear it.
I think our listener understands, you know, way more now about what's happening,
Yeah.
how big of a deal this all is.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking about this stuff.
Right.
Trying to figure out what's going on in the world.
And to our listener, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about all this? Are you, like, optimistic about a multipolar world?
Right.
Or are you worried about things getting messy?
Yeah.
Tell us. The future is being decided right now.
It is.
And your voice matters.
It does.